The big and horrifying news from over the weekend was, of course, this terrorist attack as it's being investigated in New Orleans. And I will quickly summarize the details, even though I know many of you have been keeping up with them each step of the way. And then, as this is a political show, get into the political reaction we've seen. That, as I've told you before, you'll have a disturbing event that will then be followed up with a political reaction that adds a disturbing layer in that it teaches you some people have no lines and they have no scruples and they have no dedication to truth, no matter the sensitivity of a subject. So let's get into that, and I'll show you examples, including Trump's response. But first, CNN reporting the suspect in the New Year's Day attack in New Orleans acted alone, the FBI said Thursday, as of the evidence they have so far, based on what I saw, describing the deadly event as an act of terrorism. 14 people were killed and dozens injured when the man plowed into a crowd on Bourbon Street in a pickup truck. The man who was killed in a firefight with police after the attack was identified as an Army veteran from Texas and had an ISIS flag in his vehicle. And he is a U.S. citizen born in Texas, and he served in the military. At some point during that time was radicalized by ISIS, it seems. He said in videos made before the attack that he had joined the terror group, authorities said. The attack in the French Quarter happened less than a mile, and then it gets into the Sugar Bowl part of this right now. It does note that there's no definitive connection right now between the attack in New Orleans and the Tesla Cybertruck explosion outside a Trump hotel in Las Vegas, the FBI said, even though a lot of people are wondering about that. A part of why I don't want to dive in a bunch to all the details, as is something that I bring up a lot with stories like this, is because when we're this early in the investigation, people then start throwing out, as we're about to get to, all sorts of proclamations and statements with very little information, instead of just letting the investigation play out and then coming to the proper conclusion about the facts. But the first and most important takeaway is how tragic this is and heartbreaking for the people who died, who were murdered, and their families and loved ones. It is absolutely unbelievably so sad. Now, getting into the politics of it, I guess just because the name was released being, I'm going to butcher this, but Shamsuddin Jabbar, despite him being a U.S. citizen born in Texas, you immediately had people jumping to the political point, as Trump did, that this had to do with the border, the southern border. Trump said, when I said that the criminals coming in are far worse than the criminals we have in our country, that statement was constantly refuted by Democrats and the fake news media. But it turned out to be true. The crime rate in our country is at a level that nobody has ever seen before. Maybe he means, because this would be the factual thing, it's near record lows, because then that would be close to true. But he is actually meaning it the other way, which is very wrong. Our hearts are with all of the innocent victims and their loved ones, including the brave officers of the New Orleans Police Department. That statement is absolutely true. The Trump administration will fully support the city of New Orleans as they investigate and recover from this act of pure evil. So there he references the criminals coming into our country. He's referring to the southern border. But how does this have to do with that at all? This wasn't an undocumented immigrant. This wasn't someone who entered illegally but then was waiting for an asylum claim or got some legal status. This is someone who was born in the United States. Why, especially when people are being dishonest, do we have to exploit horrifying moments for cynical political gain? It's so unnecessary. I like to believe there was a time in the past that we've disconnected from, where we could as a country unite around tragic incidents like this one. But now everything's on the table for some folks. Here's a Republican being confronted about this misinformation that we'll get into more.
About some other potential for chaos here. I mean, Donald Trump is posting misinformation about the deadly attack in New Orleans. We can show some of this on screen. He posted on Truth Social earlier this morning that it was somehow related to immigration, blaming open borders. But CNN is reporting the suspect in New Orleans is a Texas-born U.S. citizen. We were just mentioning earlier in this program that the person who rented the Cybertruck in Las Vegas was a member of the U.S. Special Forces. Neil, I mean, we're right back where we were in 2017, where Donald Trump, he takes misinformation, he takes false news from wherever, and he puts it out there, and it just confuses the hell out of everybody. What's the solution here? I mean, why can't he just stick to the facts?
Look, in this particular instance,
or wait for the facts to come in.
In this instance, if the reporting is correct and what we're hearing from law enforcement, the suspect in New Orleans was in fact an American citizen who served in the Army and was radicalized by ISIS. That said, we can't ignore the fact that from 2021 to 2024, there were 400 people on the terrorist watch list that were stopped at the border. And those are just the people that we stopped. So it is a real issue. And I think that's what President Trump does.
Yeah, but Neil...
So let's stop there. He takes the fact that, yes, it is U.S. policy that whenever we catch someone on the terrorist watch list trying to go through an illegal port of entry or a legal port of entry at an airport, at the northern border, whatever it might be, we stop them. How is that a bad thing? But he almost tries to bolster the false connection that has been made. And to me, this is not about the politics of it, especially as we're just getting information on what the heck happened here. But we've seen on networks like Fox News, Sean Hannity comes to mind in particular, him constantly going, there's going to be a terrorist attack. It's going to be an undocumented immigrant. There's going to be a terrorist attack. There's going to be a terrorist attack. It's going to be Joe Biden's fault, as if he's hoping for it. So then it stands to reason that before we even get the facts on someone, or when we get facts that dispute their narrative, they'll jump into action in this distorted and celebratory way, trying to make it about how bad Joe Biden is, when we should be unified in our mourning and our opposition to what took place, especially given that the connection they're trying to make makes no sense.
I mean,
he brings focus to
you might have people coming across the border, and yes,
on the
that
terrorist
is
watch list.
Okay, that's obviously a problem. But if that is not the case in New Orleans, and that is not the case in Las Vegas, you can't bring it up. You can't bring it up.
I think
it's not
what the president's objective is to bring attention to what he identifies as the problem. He believes that concerns about border and border security were vital to his winning election, and wants to highlight those issues. And I think that is what he has chosen to do in this particular instance. I think, as we have seen.
Yes. So he's admitting, despite not saying it, that he is making a completely irrelevant point at this point in time. Another wildly inappropriate thing we saw in the aftermath of this was Republican Senator John Kennedy, I guess, trying to make a joke about the media during the press conference.
Can I say something right quick? Tell me who you're with.
WDSU.
WDSU. Okay, and CBS.
And NBC's over here on the right.
Oh, that's an unusual position.
I don't get it.
You wouldn't. Look.
The little I'm a silly, goofy guy bit doesn't feel quite appropriate at this point in time, John. And you might be thinking, well, why aren't you showing Democratic politicians? Well, because as so often happens with all of their flaws, Democratic politicians hold themselves to a higher standard. And so it's exactly what you would expect. Completely appropriate. The tone and the tenor is in line with the tragedy. And there's a unified support for getting to the bottom of this and making sure we know all relevant information and seeking justice the best that we can. So you can go find those clips. They're just fully and completely uncontroversial. But you have one example after another, which is why we need to talk about it, of inappropriate responses that baffle me, that disturb me to my core, because it's never my inclination to pounce and see if I can exploit dishonestly something this sensitive and this horrifying.
Something else that's obvious, and I don't know if enough attention is being paid to this, but we all know that for the last 4 years, the Biden administration has been completely derelict in its duty. The congressional Republicans, we here in the House and the Senate, have repeatedly asked the DHS under the Biden administration about the correlation, the obvious concern about terrorism and the wide open border. The idea that dangerous people were coming here in droves and setting up potentially terrorist cells around the country. We have been ringing the alarms. We impeached DHS Secretary Mayorkas in the House over that very.
So then Speaker of the House Mike Johnson's doing it as well, despite him being a part of the cohort. If you do want to talk about that issue, that for political purposes clearly didn't think it was that urgent of a problem because they shot down efforts to address border security, to help Trump in the election. And they did help him because people didn't care. Because the political games and the obstruction work, unfortunately. Marjorie Taylor Greene said New Orleans terrorist attackers said to have come across the border in Eagle Pass 2 days ago shut the border down. Said by who? I don't know, Brian Glenn maybe, her boyfriend. Not said by anybody credible, not substantiated by evidence. But it's not about facts. Even, again, I cover these sorts of stories similarly in terms of here's what took place. The most important response is one of seriousness that matches the moment, that does its best to avoid some political debate, and that taps into the tragic loss of life. Then, as we get into the political discussion that's going on, here is what is so unnecessary and so harmful to our discourse. And yes, it comes from over and over again, the MAGA cohort. But they'll even jump into action saying just blatantly false things. Then you have Mike Waltz.
This is why getting President Trump's cabinet in is so important. We need Governor Noam at DHS. We need Kash Patel at FBI. We need Pete Hegseth at DOD. This is an across-the-government look. Marco Rubio at State, and of course, Ratcliffe at CIA, and Gabbard, Tulsi Gabbard at DNI. That has to be in place day one, guys, because this is a moment in transition of vulnerability, and President Trump is going to project, because he is a leader of strength, the narrative that we project on day one will be just important, and that's having our people in place.
And that's him saying this is why we need Trump's appointees. But you know what comes to mind with that is, well, actually, the issue we have with your appointees is they don't seem hyper-focused on the actual threats like this. They don't seem to only want to get justice for the actual crimes and murders and terrorist attacks. Instead, seem weirdly focused on retribution. Kash Patel talking about going after media figures. They seem weirdly focused on diehard loyalty to Trump instead of the Constitution. That's a big part of our problem with them. Actually, the core part of the problem with a lot of these nominees. Unqualified and unpatriotic because of their patriotism only lying in a dedication to Trump with so many. And that runs contrary to what you'd want in the wake of something like this. Then another thing, after an FBI statement about the attack, directly in the wake of it, you have people like Donald Trump Jr. saying, it's not a terrorist attack, it's just a mostly peaceful improvised explosion. I guess making some joke. I don't know if that's reference to BLM or if it's getting nitpicky that right at that point when that video was posted, they hadn't yet officially declared it a terrorist attack. And this gets at, and if all of you aren't aware of this, important to bring it up with you as well, but something I see with a lot of right-wing figures, unfortunately, is this urge to go, oh my gosh, the media says it only appears to be a terrorist attack. It's obviously, or the law enforcement officials are saying that at this time, there's no connection between the Tesla one and the New Orleans massacre. Oh, they're so unserious is sort of the argument they'll make. Not understanding this is the procedure of such investigations, that you are hypersensitive of the language you use until you've demonstrated with evidence that a certain label or proclamation is appropriate. So that's what they're doing. It's not that they won't come to the conclusion you think they should come to necessarily. It's just they take the steps and they use the proper language until each one has been fulfilled. Seems reasonable in such a sensitive moment. Really sad stuff. And my hope, my belief is that the investigation will flesh out all the necessary details to understand what the heck happened here. And again, our hearts go out to each and every one of the people impacted by this. And we're thinking about the lives lost. It's truly hard to comprehend.